A weak, watery sun pried its way through Arthur's thick curtains, nudging him from sleep. Before full consciousness arrived, he was already absorbing the familiar music of his sanctuary. Sheep calling from Giles's farm, wind whispering through the old oak in his yard, the assertive trill of robins announcing the daybreak. This symphony soothed him. A balm after years spent in the city's jarring din, he rose and crossed the cool boards to pull back the drapes. Mist cloaked the valley, a silvery expanse gently licking at the edge of his garden. Above, the sky blushed with dawn, painting soft promises of a day devoted to quiet thought. That Arthur's morning unfolded as a cherished ritual, a deliberate deceleration in a world perpetually speeding up. He began with water, then 20 minutes of Tai Chi on the veranda, his slow, graceful movements a silent dialogue with the tranquil air. Afterward, he ground coffee beans, their rich scent weaving through the cottage as he prepped his French. Pressed, he carried his steaming mug to the sun-drenched nook of his study, where a time-worn leather armchair nestled beside a towering bookshelf. He chose a collection of Bertrand Russell's essays, a well-loved companion, and settled in to read. The sharp logic of Russell's arguments offered a welcome contrast to the world's frequent disorder. He was absorbed in an essay exploring the boundaries of human understanding when the calm shattered. A guttural rumble, deep and resonant, echoed through the valley, steadily intensifying. Arthur frowned, marking his place in the book. The sound spoke unmistakably of a vehicle, a hefty one struggling against his challenging lane. The lane. Hardly a road, it was more of a suggestion, a mere indentation winding through the valley, linking his haven to the distant main road. This rough track was the toll exacted for his solitude, a constant reminder of civilization's limits. He stood and walked to the window, the rumble now mixed with frustrated engine roars, and the grating screech of metal on stone. Through the trees, he glimpsed the outline of a large truck, its progress agonizingly slow. Arthur sighed. Deliveries were invariably an ordeal. He'd long since abandoned ordering anything delicate and planned his grocery trips around spells of dry weather. Yet even seasoned delivery personnel seemed to underestimate the lane's treacherous nature. He tugged on durable boots and a wax jacket, anticipating the inevitable plea for assistance. As he stepped outside, the truck finally lurched into view, a delivery van larger than any that had dared this route, emblazoned with the Valley Produce logo. The driver, a young man bearing a weary expression, leaned from the cab, assessing the situation with combined annoyance and resignation. "Morning," Arthur called, approaching the truck. The driver started, surprised by Arthur's sudden appearance. "Oh, hey, you wouldn't happen to live around here, would you?" "I do," Arthur said, gesturing toward the cottage. "Looks like you've encountered some difficulties." "Some." The driver arched his brows. "This lane is something else that I'm supposed to deliver a large order to Mr. Penhaligon?" He checked his manifest. "That would be me," Arthur confirmed. "And I believe you're stuck fast." The driver nodded glumly. "Solidly stuck. The rear wheels are spinning in that gully, and I'm not going anywhere without some real help." Arthur surveyed the predicament. The truck's rear tires were indeed sunk deep in a muddy furrow, spinning uselessly. "I might have something to assist. Follow me." He led the way to his shed, a humble structure concealing a surprising collection of tools. Despite his intellectual leanings, Arthur was a practical man. He'd cultivated self-reliance, a necessity when living so far from the beaten path that he rummaged within, emerging with a robust tow rope and a pair of timber planks. "These should provide some grip," he said, handing the planks to the driver. "Put them under the wheels, and I'll see if I can haul you out with my Land Rover." The driver looked vastly relieved. "That would be a miracle, Mr. I'm already way behind schedule." Working in unison, they wedged the planks beneath the churning tires. Arthur then fastened the tow rope to the truck's front axle and the back of his Land Rover, a vehicle passed down from his father and meticulously cared for. "Okay," Arthur said, settling into the Land Rover. "I'll pull gently. Just steer straight and try to keep the wheels on the planks." He engaged the Land Rover's four-wheel drive, and carefully pressed the accelerator. The engine groaned, the tires biting into the muddy earth. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, the truck began to budge. After some tense moments, the truck was free of the mire. The driver released a jubilant shout. "You're a savior, mister. I don't know what I'd have done without you." "Glad to be of assistance," Arthur said, coiling the rope. "Though you may want to advise your dispatcher regarding the state of this lane, that it's unsuitable for vehicles of this size." "I will," the driver promised. "You can bet on it." He hesitated, then extended a hand. "Name's Danny, by the way." "Arthur," Arthur responded, shaking Danny's hand. Danny climbed back into the truck. "I still need to unload your order, right?" Arthur nodded. "I'll indicate where to put it." Unloading proved laborious, requiring multiple trips up the garden path. Arthur had ordered an assortment of fresh produce, basic supplies to sustain him for weeks. He found a meditative calm in cooking, appreciating the simple act of preparing food. While they worked, Danny glanced around at the cottage and the surrounding landscape. "You've got a great place here, Arthur. Truly serene." "It is," Arthur agreed. "That's why I chose it. Must be lonely, though, right?" "All alone out here?" Arthur pondered the question. "At times," he admitted, "but I find the solitude more enriching than isolating, that I value my privacy, my independence, that I need the space to contemplate, to create." He gestured toward the valley, the mist now fading, revealing the undulating hills and vibrant meadows. "I spent years living in the city, besieged by clamor and crowds. I felt as though I was constantly under assault by information, by demands on my time, that I needed to retreat, to locate a place where I could reconnect with myself." "I understand that," Danny said, wiping his forehead. "The city can wear you down. But out here, what do you even do all day?" Arthur smiled. "I read, I write, I tend the garden. I think, and I listen to the birdsong, that I observe the changing seasons. Simple things, really, but they bring me profound joy." He paused, then added, "And on occasion, I rescue stranded delivery drivers." Danny chuckled. "Well, I appreciate it. More than you know." With the unloading finally completed, Danny re-entered the truck. "Take care, Arthur. And thanks again." "Drive carefully," Arthur called as the truck lumbered back down the lane. Its progress still slow and precarious, he watched until the truck vanished from sight, then turned back toward the cottage. The morning's peace had been disturbed, but not entirely destroyed. He still had his coffee, his books, and the quiet beauty of the valley. He settled back into his armchair. He couldn't help but mull over the price of seclusion. That it wasn't only the neglected lane, the occasional delivery mishap. That it was also the isolation, the tenuous link to the wider world. Yet for Arthur, the advantages far outweighed the disadvantages. That he needed this refuge, this space to be himself, free from the pressures and expectations of contemporary life. That it was a place where his thoughts could flow clearly, where he could nurture his own inner harmony, that in an increasingly turbulent world. That was an invaluable treasure. That he picked up his book and continued reading. The words of Bertrand Russell once more occupying his mind. But this time, the truck's throaty drone lingered at the edge of his awareness, a reminder that even in the most remote corners, the outside world could intrude. And sometimes it arrived bearing unexpected deliveries, the toll. The mailbox, a rusted monument tilting toward collapse, grudgingly surrendered its contents, a deluge of junk mail, a vibrant seed catalog promising floral fantasies, and a heavy, cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed crest of Tranquility Glen's Homeowners Association. That Arthur's gut tightened like a seized engine. He rarely received hard copies from them. Their dictates usually arrived digitally, choking his already cluttered inbox with edicts about lawn care, which he routinely ignored, and social gatherings, which he diligently dodged. A tangible letter felt portentous. He gathered the mail, depositing the unwanted flyers and catalog on the cluttered kitchen counter. The cream envelope lay like a gauntlet thrown down. He brewed a cup of Earl Grey, a feeble attempt to calm the unease prickling beneath his skin. Then, with a weary exhalation, he seized the letter and ripped it open. The heading, stark and bold, sans serif type, proclaimed, "Important notice, infrastructure and community enhancements." Arthur scoffed at HOA speak for prepare to be fleeced and further restricted. He skimmed the initial paragraph, a saccharine recitation about upholding property values and long-term community welfare, that he jumped to the second, where the real agenda, cloaked in bureaucratic jargon, surfaced. Following extensive discussions and a comprehensive evaluation of community requirements, the Tranquility Glens Homeowners Association has authorized the implementation of a cutting-edge access management solution. This will encompass the installation of automated portals at the principal entrances to the Glens, utilizing transponder technology for uninterrupted resident passage and minimizing unauthorized vehicular access. Arthur reread the sentence. Toll gates on their quiet lane? The audacity stung like a slap that he continued, his pulse escalating with each line. The decree detailed the supposed benefits. Enhanced security, reduced commercial traffic, Danny's ordeal apparently forgotten, and a pledge to funnel toll revenue into community improvements. The amenities, predictably, featured a renovated clubhouse, an entity Arthur had never entered, and a revamped playground, irrelevant to his solitary existence. Then came the crushing blow. Residents will be required to acquire a transponder for each vehicle registered to their address. A recurring monthly fee of $50 will be levied per transponder to defray the operational expenses of the access control system. $50 each month for the privilege of traversing the same asphalt he'd navigated for half a decade, the same stretch he'd helped Danny wrestle his truck from just this morning. A road, moreover, in which he held a considerable financial interest through Tranquility Investments mortgage. The irony tasted bitter as he crushed the letter in his fist, the paper whispering its protest. This wasn't mere inconvenience. It was a direct affront that he'd sought refuge in Tranquility Glens precisely to escape the stifling rules and endless fees of urban living. Now, the city's tentacles had reached him. His tea had chilled. He emptied it down the drain, the ceramic clink amplifying the sudden quiet. He needed to vent, to confirm he wasn't tilting at windmills. But to whom? He'd hardly nurtured friendships in Tranquility Glens. Then, Martha surfaced in his memory. Martha, several houses down, a retired librarian possessing a keen mind and an even keener wit. She'd always seemed like someone unlikely to tolerate being bled dry by the HOA. That he retrieved his phone, scrolling to Martha's number, reluctantly added after she'd assisted him in locating a first edition of Moby Dick at a local book fair. A moment of hesitation, and he tapped the call button. Hello. Martha's voice carried a hint of exertion, as if she'd been battling nature. Martha, it's Arthur Penhaligon, that a few houses from you. Arthur, this is unexpected. I was just wrestling with a particularly tenacious bindweed. What can I do for you? Have you received the HOA letter? A pause. The one concerning the toll plazas? Oh, Arthur, don't even get me started. Arthur felt a wave of reprieve wash over him, that he wasn't alone in his indignation. So, you share my opinion that it's utterly bonkers. Bonkers is an understatement, Martha huffed. $50 a month. For what? To finance the HOA president's new putter and those transponders, labeling us like livestock. Exactly, Arthur amplified, his voice escalating. It's a privacy invasion, a flagrant shakedown, and completely unwarranted. The roads are already tranquil. The enhanced security is a complete fallacy. What menace are they shielding us from? Exactly, militant chipmunks. Martha chuckled. Never underestimate the squirrels. Arthur, they're plotting something, mark my words. But you're spot on, it's preposterous that I've resided here for 2 decades, and the HOA has been nothing but a persistent annoyance. They're slowly suffocating the charm of this place. So what's the plan? Arthur questioned, the words hanging in the space between them. Well, Martha declared, her tone hardening, I'm contemplating attending the next HOA meeting and giving them a piece of my mind. Perhaps we can galvanize other residents. Surely more share our views. Arthur wavered. Confrontation was not in his repertoire. But the prospect of being extorted for something so fundamentally unjust, of having his precious solitude further eroded, spurred him onward. I'll accompany you, he declared, surprising himself. "I'll even speak that I'm not sure exactly what, but I'll contribute. That's the spirit, Arthur. We must oppose this. They can't simply barge in here and transform Tranquility Glens into some enclave for the excessively rich." Speaking of rich, Arthur mused, a sudden notion striking him. "Do you recall who holds their mortgage? Tranquility Investments, if I'm correct." Arthur inhaled sharply. "I own Tranquility Investments." The line fell silent for a heartbeat. Then, Martha exploded with laughter. "Oh, Arthur, this just keeps getting better. You own their mortgage company? Delicious." "Deliciously convoluted," Arthur amended. "But possibly it grants us an edge." "An edge? Arthur, it's a tactical nuke. We must deploy it." Arthur felt a tangle of exhilaration and unease. He had stumbled onto something far grander than a mere gate dispute. He had uncovered power, latent and unexpected, and the responsibilities that accompanied it. The price of privacy, it seemed, was escalating rapidly, and the battle for it had just commenced. He ended the call, the crumpled HOA notification still gripped in his palm. The knot in his stomach had not vanished, but it was now interwoven with a thread of something different. Resolved that he might be an introvert who treasured his peace, but he refused to be bullied by a gaggle of petty despots in golf carts. He had a mortgage company to oversee and a toll gate to dismantle. The meeting. Arthur smoothed his lone, presentable shirt, a faded blue Oxford usually reserved for medical appointments. Gazing at his reflection, a wave of disquiet washed over him. This wasn't the face of a rebel, more a retired accountant braced for an IRS audit. He exhaled, a puff of resignation. IT wasn't taxes at stake, but principle, and Eleanor Ainsworth. He'd sharpen his arguments all morning, carefully listing legal precedents for reasonable access and the potential damage the toll gates would inflict. On property values, he'd even unearthed copies of the original Tranquility Glens brochure, promising secluded, unrestricted living. He felt equipped, even if not entirely sure of success. Martha had offered her support, but Arthur declined. He needed to test the waters, see if logic could win out before resorting to harsher measures. He'd imagined a composed, rational exchange, perhaps even a civil nod to his concerns as a resident, a stakeholder. He deserved a hearing. The Tranquility Glens Community Center, normally a place for potlucks and bingo, throbbed with an entirely different current. Residents clustered, expressions a blend of worry and resentment. Low murmurs filled the air, almost palpable. Arthur felt a sudden swell of camaraderie, a shared sense of wrong, that he found a seat toward the back, trying to disappear into the woodwork. The room's focal point was a long table where the HOA board members sat, starkly lit by fluorescent tubes. Eleanor Ainsworth, her silver coif, resembling impenetrable armor, surveyed the room like a monarch holding court. Her piercing gaze swept across the gathering, and Arthur felt a shiver when their eyes briefly locked. Oh, Eleanor's right sat Bartholomew Bart Higgins, the HOA treasurer. Bart appeared perpetually on the brink of collapse. His tie hung askew. Beads of sweat dotted his brow, and he nervously shuffled papers as if they were primed explosives. Arthur often felt a touch of pity for Bart. He seemed utterly overwhelmed, a mere puppet in Eleanor's elaborate charade. That Eleanor's left was occupied by Clara Meadowbrook. Arthur knew Clara by reputation, a retired English professor known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding commitment to fairness. Arthur felt a spark of hope. If anyone could expose Eleanor's artifice, it was Clara. Eleanor tapped a lacquered nail on the agenda. "Good evening, residents. Let's begin. Yes, you are aware. We've called this meeting to discuss the implementation of the new toll gates and the associated fees." Her voice was a carefully measured blend of authority and saccharine pleasantry that a wave of murmurs cascaded through the hall. "I understand there are misgivings," Eleanor continued, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly. "However, I assure you, this decision was not taken lightly. It's for the collective good of Tranquility Glens, ensuring the continued maintenance and security of our exclusive community." The word exclusive was coated with smug satisfaction. Arthur raised his hand, but Eleanor brushed it aside, launching into a drawn-out justification of the escalating upkeep costs, rising insurance premiums, and the necessity to deter unwanted elements from entering the glens. Each pretext rang hollow, a transparent attempt to conceal the real motivation. Iron-fisted control. Finally, after what felt like eons, Eleanor paused, her gaze roving the room. "Now, are there any questions?" Arthur jumped at the opening. "Yes, Mrs. Ainsworth. Several, in fact. Firstly, concerning the legal basis for these toll gates." Eleanor cut him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Mister, I don't believe I recognize you." "Penhaligon. Arthur Penhaligon. I live on Elderwood Lane." "Ah, yes, Mr. Penhaligon. Rest assured, our legal counsel has thoroughly examined this plan. It is entirely within our purview as a homeowners association." "But the original deeds," Arthur pressed, brandishing the promotional brochure, "explicitly state unrestricted access, and the fees appear excessive, especially considering the lack of clarity about their allocation." Eleanor's smile tightened, a mere baring of teeth. "Mr. Penhaligon, I appreciate your zeal. However, the board has already deliberated on these matters. We are confident that the advantages of the toll gates will far outweigh any perceived inconvenience." "Mr. Higgins, perhaps you could elaborate on the financial justifications?" Bart flinched, his eyes magnified behind his thick lenses. He cleared his throat, nervously shuffling his papers. "Well, yes, Ainsworth. Yes, you know, the estimated expenses for landscaping and insecurity have risen considerably." He stumbled over his words, refusing to meet anyone's eye. "Considerably?" Arthur countered. "By what percentage? And can you provide a detailed accounting of these charges?" Bart cast a desperate glance at Eleanor, who rewarded him with a glacial glare. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice turning steely, "I hardly believe a detailed accounting is necessary, that we trust our treasurer to manage the finances responsibly." Clara Meadowbrook interjected, her voice level but firm. "With all due respect, Mrs. Ainsworth, transparency is crucial. The residents deserve to know how their money is being allocated." Eleanor fixed Clara with a venomous stare. "Clara, I appreciate your contribution, but I assure you, everything is being managed appropriately." She faced the room, her voice regaining its sugary sweetness. "Now, are there any further constructive questions?" Arthur felt a surge of exasperation. He was being stonewalled, belittled, treated like a tiresome gnat. He glanced at Bart, yearning for a glimmer of support, but the treasurer remained mute, his gaze glued to his trembling hands. "But Mrs. Ainsworth," Arthur persisted, feeling his face flush. "I own Tranquility Investments, the mortgage company for the Glens at S.O. I am not just a resident. I am a major stakeholder. I would think you would want to hear what I have to say." Eleanor's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The telltale tick flickered at the corner of her mouth. It was the first sign that his words had hit their mark. But she swiftly regained composure, her face solidifying into a mask of icy indifference. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice laced with disdain, "I am well aware of your recent acquisition. However, that does not give you the right to disrupt these proceedings. The board has reached its decision, and we intend to proceed accordingly to Mr. Higgins. Please call for a vote." Bart, looking like a cornered animal, swallowed hard and mumbled, "All in favor of implementing the toll gates and associated fees, please say aye." A chorus of reluctant ayes echoed through the room, mostly from residents who either feared Eleanor's displeasure or simply wished to avoid conflict. "Opposed?" Bart asked, his voice barely audible. A handful of brave souls, including Clara Meadowbrook, offered a defiant nay. But their voices were swallowed by the overwhelming support for Eleanor's agenda. Arthur remained silent, fists clenched. He understood, with a sinking feeling, that he was facing more than a stubborn HOA board. He was contending with unshakable resolve, a woman who would stop at nothing to hold onto her power. "The motion carries," Bart announced, his voice shaking. He looked at Arthur with a mixture of pity and apprehension. Eleanor smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Thank you, residents, for Your cooperation. This meeting is adjourned. As the residents began to disperse, Arthur felt a hand grasp his arm. He turned to find Clara Meadowbrook, her eyes conveying both understanding and resolve. "Don't surrender, Mr. Penhaligon," she said softly. "This isn't finished." Arthur nodded, a flicker of hope igniting within him that he knew Clara was right. This was merely the opening skirmish. He had a mortgage company to manage and an HOA to challenge. The battle for Tranquility Glens had only just begun. Legal grounds. The scent of lemon polish and old law books hung heavy in Jonathan Davies' office. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and catching the glint of his Harvard Law diploma displayed prominently on the wall. Arthur shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, the scent a stark contrast to the fresh pine needles and damp earth he was used to at Tranquility Glens. "So, Mr. Penhaligon," John began, leaning back in his chair, a pen clicking rhythmically between his fingers. He was younger than Arthur, barely pushing 30, with a sharp jawline and an eager glint in his eyes. "Let me just reiterate to make sure I fully understand the situation. Your homeowners association is attempting to implement toll gates on a road you believe is privately owned?" Arthur nodded, adjusting his tie. "Precisely, Tranquility Glens Road. And I have reason to believe I hold significant sway over that road through my company, Tranquility Investments, which holds a mortgage on a large percentage of properties in the Glens." John's eyebrows shot up. "Interesting. And you presented this information at the HOA meeting?" "I did that. I even brought a copy of the plat map. But Eleanor Ainsworth, she steamrolled right over me." Arthur's voice tightened with frustration. He handed John a manila folder containing copies of the HOA bylaws, the plat map, and his company's mortgage records. "I need to know where I stand legally before this thing escalates." John accepted the folder with a confident nod. "I'll need to examine all of this, of course. But on the surface, if you possess documented ownership rights, the HOA's actions could be construed as a violation of those rights." He steepled his fingers, considering, "especially if they're aware of your ownership and proceed regardless." For the next hour, John meticulously reviewed the documents. He furrowed his brow, occasionally scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Arthur watched him, trying to decipher his expressions, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension churning in his gut. The ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner filled the silence. Finally, John looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, Mr. Penhaligon, it appears you have a very strong case." Relief washed over Arthur, loosening the knot in his shoulders. "You're sure?" "Relatively. This plat map clearly indicates that Tranquility Glens Road is indeed a private road, and your documentation seems to confirm Tranquility Investments holds a mortgage on a significant number of properties that border the road. This gives you, in essence, a controlling interest in the easement rights along that stretch." John tapped the plat map with his pen. "Legally, it would be difficult for the HOA to claim eminent domain, especially given the circumstances. They need to prove a compelling public interest, which I doubt they can." "So what does this mean?" Arthur asked, leaning forward. "It means they can't just slap up toll gates without your consent, or at least without proper legal justification. That it seems Mrs. Ainsworth may have overstepped." John chuckled, a hint of excitement in his voice. He envisioned this as a great opportunity. Arthur felt a surge of vindication. Clara had been right, that he wasn't crazy. "So what do I do now?" "We have options," John said, his pen clicking faster. "First, we could send a cease and desist letter, outlining your ownership rights and demanding they halt all plans for the toll gates. This is the polite approach, but given your description of Mrs. Ainsworth," he trailed off, raising an eyebrow. Arthur snorted. "Politeness won't get us anywhere with Eleanor. I suspected as much." "Okay, then we could explore filing an injunction to prevent them from proceeding. This would be a more aggressive tactic, potentially involving court hearings and depositions. And the chances of success with that? Pretty good, based on what I've seen, but it won't be cheap. Litigation can be expensive, Mr. Penhaligon. There will be filing fees, court costs, and of course my hourly rate." John named a sum that made Arthur wince, though he tried not to show it. "I understand," Arthur said, His elation slightly tempered. He had expected this, but it was still a sobering reality. What about the HOA bylaws? Can't they claim some clause that gives them the right to regulate traffic? John shook his head. Possible, but unlikely to hold up in court. Bylaws can't supersede established property rights. They can regulate parking, maybe enforce speed limits, but they can't unilaterally impose tolls on a private road without just cause and proper compensation. He paused. However, Mrs. Ainsworth may try to claim that the road is a common area subject to HOA control, that we need to be prepared to counter that argument with definitive proof of its private status, which you seem to have. So, what's your recommendation? Arthur pressed. John tapped his pen against the desk again. Honestly, I think we need to send the cease and desist, but with a veiled threat of further legal action. Make it clear we're not bluffing. Give them a chance to back down gracefully. If they don't, then we prepare for a legal battle. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. And Mr. Penhaligon, I'm confident we can win. Arthur considered this. He wasn't thrilled about the prospect of a prolonged legal fight, but Eleanor Ainsworth had left him little choice that he thought of the peace and quiet he had sought in Tranquility Glens, now threatened by this power grab. All right, John, Arthur said, extending his hand. Let's send that letter, but be ready to fight. John shook his hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. Excellent. I'll draft something up tonight and have it to you for review first thing in the morning. We'll make sure Mrs. Ainsworth understands the gravity of the situation. As Arthur walked out of John Davies' office, the scent of lemon polish seemed less oppressive, replaced by a faint scent of hope. He had a weapon now, a legal weapon, and he was ready to use it. But a nagging unease lingered in the back of his mind. He knew Eleanor Ainsworth wouldn't back down easily. This was just the beginning. Back in Tranquility Glens, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. As Arthur drove down Tranquility Glens Road, he looked at the familiar landscape with new eyes. But he wasn't just a resident anymore. He was a combatant, defending his piece of paradise. He glanced at the spot where the toll gates were slated to be built, a silent promise forming in his mind. They wouldn't get away with this. He would fight for his privacy, for his peace, even if it meant taking on the entire HOA. He just needed to prepare himself for the war that was coming. Double down. The HOA meeting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and simmering resentment. Arthur placed the thick binder containing Jonathan Davies' cease and desist letter, along with meticulously copied deeds and corporate filings for Tranquility Investments, directly in front of Eleanor Ainsworth. The fluorescent lights glinted off her severe silver bun, making her look even more formidable. Good evening, Eleanor, Arthur said, his voice calm but carrying a steely edge. Around the long mahogany table, faces were a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Bart Higgins, the HOA secretary, nervously adjusted his glasses, his gaze darting between Arthur and Eleanor like a trapped sparrow. Clara Meadowbrook, her silver hair a softer contrast to Eleanor's, offered Arthur a small, encouraging nod. Eleanor didn't acknowledge Arthur's greeting. She simply stared at the binder, as if it were a particularly offensive weed that had sprouted in her perfectly manicured garden. What is this, Penhaligon? She finally snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Documentation, Eleanor. Supporting documentation to IT clearly outlines Tranquility Investments' ownership of the underlying road, including the specific stretch you intend to desecrate with your toll gates. Bart Higgins squeaked. Desecrate? Mr. Penhaligon, that's hardly appropriate language for a formal HOA meeting. Arthur ignored him, keeping his focus on Eleanor. The documentation also details the potential legal ramifications of ignoring these facts that Mr. Davies, my legal counsel, has been quite thorough. Eleanor finally picked up the binder, flipping through the pages with a dismissive flick of her wrist. This is all conjecture, she declared, tossing the binder back onto the table. Your Tranquility Investments is just a shell company that we've looked into it. Have you now? And what did your investigation uncover, Eleanor? Did it perhaps reveal that Tranquility Investments holds the mortgage on the entire Tranquility Glens development? Arthur asked, allowing a hint of amusement to creep into his voice that a collective gasp rippled through the room. Bart Higgins's face paled, Eleanor's jaw tightened. a muscle twitching in her cheek. Preposterous, she spat out. This is a blatant attempt to intimidate the board. We have consulted with our own legal team, and they assure us that the toll gates are perfectly legal and within the HOA's purview. Perfectly legal until they receive a summons, Arthur countered. Mr. Davies is quite eager to present this evidence in court. He believes a judge will find it persuasive. He watched Eleanor's reaction, noting the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, quickly masked by a renewed wave of defiance. It was a subtle tell, but Arthur saw it. He knew he was getting to her. The toll gates are being erected, Eleanor stated, her voice regaining its iron grip. They will improve the quality of life for all residents by reducing through traffic and generating revenue for community improvements. At what cost, Eleanor? Clara Meadowbrook spoke, her voice calm but firm. At the cost of alienating our neighbors? At the cost of potentially bankrupting the HOA with frivolous lawsuits? Eleanor shot Clara a venomous glare. Clara, you're being naive that we have a responsibility to protect the interests of the community. This is about maintaining order, not fostering anarchy. Order at the expense of justice? Clara challenged. I've reviewed Mr. Penhaligon's documentation, Eleanor. While I'm not a lawyer, it seems compelling. Shouldn't we at least consider a second opinion before proceeding? A second opinion? Eleanor scoffed. We have already consulted with legal counsel. Their opinion is all that matters. Bart Higgins, still looking like he might faint, tentatively raised his hand. Perhaps we could table the discussion and review the documentation more thoroughly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, fixing Bart with a look that could curdle milk. Bart, are you questioning my leadership? Bart visibly recoiled, his hand dropping back to the table like a lead weight. No, Eleanor, of course not. I just thought. You thought incorrectly. Eleanor snapped. She turned back to Arthur, her face a mask of cold fury. This is not over, Penhaligon. You may think you've won some sort of victory here, but you're mistaken. That we will fight you every step of the way, that we have the resources and we have the determination. And I have the truth, Eleanor, Arthur replied, his voice unwavering. And a damn good lawyer, remember that. He stood up, gathering his binder. I trust you'll inform your legal team of my intentions. Perhaps they can advise you to reconsider your position before this escalates further. Good evening. As Arthur turned to leave, Eleanor's voice followed him, laced with undisguised venom. You'll regret this, Penhaligon, that you'll regret ever crossing me. He didn't bother to respond, simply walking out of the room, leaving behind a simmering cauldron of resentment and fear. Clara Meadowbrook caught up with him in the hallway. Arthur, wait. He stopped, turning to face her. The fluorescent lights seemed to soften her features, highlighting the genuine concern in her eyes. Thank you, Clara, he said sincerely, for speaking up. That I know it couldn't have been easy. Someone had to, she replied, her voice low. Eleanor has been running roughshod over everyone for far too long. She's become obsessed with control, and she's losing sight of what's best for the community. She's certainly not making any friends, Arthur agreed. Clara sighed. She's convinced herself that she's doing what's right, that she's protecting Tranquility Glens from some imagined threat, but she's only creating division and animosity. I appreciate your support, Clara, but are you prepared for the fallout? Eleanor doesn't take kindly to dissent. Clara straightened her shoulders, a spark of defiance in her eyes. I'm a retired English professor. Arthur, I've dealt with far worse than Eleanor Ainsworth besides, she added with a wry smile. I've always enjoyed a good debate. Then welcome to the fray, Arthur said, extending his hand. I have a feeling this is just the beginning. Clara shook his hand firmly. What can I do to help? Keep your eyes and ears open, Arthur replied. Find out what Eleanor is planning. Any information you can provide would be invaluable. Consider it done, Clara said. And Arthur, yes. Be careful. Eleanor plays dirty. Arthur nodded. I suspected as much, but so can I. He looked down at the binder tucked under his arm. She wants to fight, it seems, and I'm more than happy to oblige. The scent of lemon polish seemed to cling to him as he walked out into the cool night air, a silent promise hanging in the balance. The battle for Tranquility Glens had truly begun, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Eleanor Ainsworth had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because now, Arthur was truly invested. He wouldn't simply defend his rights. He would dismantle her illusion of control, brick by meticulously placed brick. Follow the money. The ancient computer's drone, a steady counterpoint to the still house, offered a strange solace. Fueled by stale coffee and a slow-burning indignation, Arthur narrowed his eyes at the screen's luminescence. Hours had dissolved as he mined public records, piecing together names and dates like a detective reconstructing a shattered puzzle. Eleanor Ainsworth's condescending smile haunted him, a constant goad to the coming conflict. He began with the basics: the HOA's state filings, annual reports, meeting transcripts, fiscal breakdowns, reams of bureaucratic prose seemingly designed to induce apathy. Most residents likely skimmed them, offered a perfunctory nod, and retreated to their lives, trusting in the status quo. But Arthur wasn't wired that way. He possessed a preternatural ability to detect the discordant note, the discrepancy that suggested something rotten beneath the surface. The first anomaly surfaced as a series of liberally applied consulting fees. Hefty payments funneled to obscure entities for vaguely defined community enrichment or strategic development. These companies lacked any substantial web presence, just shell corporations lurking in Delaware. Arthur flagged it. Next, he turned to the landscaping budget. Tranquility Glens was undeniably manicured, but the sums allocated to Green Vista landscaping appeared wildly inflated. Even considering the extensive grounds that a quick property records search revealed Green Vista was controlled by a relative of a board member. The pieces, disparate moments ago, now began to coalesce into a portrait of systematic, small-scale graft. But the true bombshell, the revelation that chilled Arthur to the bone, lay concealed within the thicket of mortgage documentation. The original mortgage on Tranquility Glens, held by Tranquility Investments, was conventional enough. Yet, over time, it had been repeatedly renegotiated, each iteration tilting the scales slightly more in favor of the lender, Tranquility Investments. Arthur backtracked through the transactions, following the digital trail that he uncovered a pattern. With each refinancing, the HOA had extracted additional funds, ostensibly earmarked for capital improvements. These improvements, however, remained conspicuously absent or vastly overpriced. He summoned the initial loan agreement, then the subsequent refinance papers. The terms were a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses designed to obscure the truth. But Arthur, versed in the arcane language of finance, saw through the deception. Eleanor and her cabal had been exploiting the HOA as a personal ATM, systematically draining its resources through a series of questionable financial maneuvers. The toll gates IT clicked. They weren't about security or property values. They were about dominion, about extracting every last penny from the inhabitants of Tranquility Glens. They were a manifestation of a deeper malignancy, a disease Arthur now vowed to excise. That he leaned back, the weight of his discovery a tangible burden. This extended far beyond mere toll gates. This was about endemic corruption, abuse of authority, the very integrity of Tranquility Glens. He needed irrefutable evidence, proof that would withstand legal scrutiny. He needed to connect the dots, to expose the network of deceit that allowed Eleanor Ainsworth and her accomplices to enrich themselves at the expense of their neighbors. He brewed another pot of coffee, its pungent aroma permeating the air. But a long night stretched ahead. He needed to delve deeper, to unearth every concealed transaction, every backroom deal. He had to construct an unassailable case, one from which even Eleanor Ainsworth couldn't weasel her way out. The following morning, fatigued but resolute, Arthur dialed Sarah, his former colleague, a forensic accountant of unparalleled acumen. "Sarah, it's Arthur. I'm in need of your expertise." "Arthur, this is unexpected. What predicament have you stumbled into this time?" Her voice was friendly, tinged with amusement. "HOA trouble," Arthur said, his voice hardening. though it's more profound than just rowdy residents and unauthorized paint schemes that I believe there's substantial financial impropriety, and I require someone who can track the money. Sarah's tone shifted, becoming serious. Recount everything. Arthur spent the next hour outlining his suspicions, detailing the anomalies he'd unearthed in the HOA's financial records. He dissected the consulting fees, the landscaping expenditures, the mortgage refinancings. He underscored the role of Tranquility Investments and the inherent conflict of interest. This sounds like a textbook case of embezzlement, Sarah concluded, proving it will be challenging that we'll need access to all pertinent documents, bank records, invoices, contracts. Can you procure them? I believe so, Arthur responded. I possess access to some records via public filings, and owning Tranquility Investments, I can directly request the mortgage paperwork. Good, Sarah said. That's a beginning that I'll establish a secure server to archive everything. Additionally, I'll require access to your Tranquility Investments accounts. Can you grant me temporary clearance? Arthur hesitated. Granting anyone access to his company's accounts represented a significant gamble, but he trusted Sarah unconditionally that he knew she was the most qualified individual for the task. Yes, he conceded, I'll configure it, but you must pledge to exercise utmost caution. You have my assurance, Sarah responded. I'll safeguard your accounts as if they were my own. Now, transmit everything you possess. Let's determine if we can unravel this knot. Arthur experienced a surge of optimism. He wasn't alone in this battle. He had an ally, someone capable of exposing the truth and holding Eleanor Ainsworth accountable. He dedicated the remainder of the day to gathering documents, scanning them, and uploading them to the secure server Sarah had provisioned. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. As dusk descended, Arthur leaned back, watching the final files upload. That he rose and drifted towards the window. The setting sun painted long shadows across the meticulously maintained lawns of Tranquility Glens. He thought of his neighbors, the unwitting sponsors of Eleanor Ainsworth's extravagant lifestyle. He thought of Clara, who had bravely challenged the toll gates. He thought of all those who had been silenced, intimidated, or ignored by the HOA, that he understood that this would be a protracted and arduous struggle. Eleanor Ainsworth wouldn't capitulate readily, but Arthur was prepared. Truth was his weapon, and he had Sarah, and he had the mortgage. That a humorless smile touched his lips. Eleanor Ainsworth had chosen the wrong adversary. She had underestimated him. IT was a mistake she would come to rue. He messaged Sarah, "Everything is uploaded. Let me know what you discover." Then he switched off the computer, poured himself a glass of water, and waited. The silence of the house was no longer a comfort. IT pulsed with expectation, with the promise of reckoning. The game had commenced, Tranquility found. The monitor's luminescence splashed across Arthur's features, a kaleidoscope of blues and greens. Hours dissolved into a digital blur as he picked through the tangled web that was Tranquility Investments. His living room, usually a haven for quiet thought, had transformed into a command center, strewn with printouts, documents, and drained mugs. "Blast it," he grumbled, swiping a silver strand from his brow. Another blind alley. He had envisioned a clear path to the ultimate beneficiaries of Tranquility Investments, but instead unearthed a many-headed beast. Each clue severed spawned another two, shell companies layered like matryoshka dolls concealing dirty money. He sank back into his chair, the leather groaning beneath him. The wall clock ticked with infuriating regularity. Eleanor Ainsworth was thorough, he knew, but this bordered on preternatural.as if she had anticipated his every move, erecting an impregnable fortress of financial obscurity. Returning to the screen, he faced the cursor blinking as if in accusation that he'd begun with public records, a superficial layer designed to mislead anyone taking a cursory look. The registered address for Tranquility Investments was a featureless office block in Wilmington, Delaware, a known sanctuary for nameless corporations. From there, the trail spiraled through the Caymans, then Panama, vanishing finally into a black hole of anonymous accounts. Frustration ate at him. The funds themselves had ceased to be the point. Now it was about principle, that IT was about Eleanor Ainsworth's gall, her presumption that she could act with impunity. Beyond reproach, he had fostered a tranquil existence. But Eleanor had stoked embers long dormant. A righteous fury he barely recognized, he pivoted towards the whiteboard dominating one wall, a chaotic spiderweb of names, dates, and logos connected by a frenzied network of red and black lines that he scanned it, hunting for a pattern, some overlooked nexus. "Right, Arthur," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. "Think like a coder. This isn't a simple paper trail. It's an intricate algorithm. You need the decryption key." He eschewed the official channels, plunging into the dark web, where anonymity reigned and information flowed freely. For a price, he navigated the encrypted networks, sidestepping the more depraved haunts, until he discovered a forum frequented by disillusioned financial analysts and hackers. He posted an inquiry, promising considerable compensation for intelligence leading to the true owners of Tranquility Investments. The replies ranged from obvious scams to frustrating dead ends. But one message caught his eye. Concise, veiled, containing a single link to a clandestine server in Iceland. He paused, worried at a trap? A way to pinpoint his IP and compromise his investigation. The thirst for answers trumped his caution. Activating his VPN, masking his whereabouts, he clicked the link. The server responded sluggishly, the data trickling in at a snail's pace. At last, a solitary file emerged. A heavily fortified document that he downloaded it, beginning the arduous decryption process that he fed it through a gauntlet of algorithms, each tailored to break a specific type of encryption. Hours seeped away, the computer fans whirring and his fingers restless, drumming the only sounds. Finally, the file relinquished its secrets. A ledger, meticulously documenting the flow of capital in and out of Tranquility Investments. The names were still masked, but the transactions spoke volumes. He spent hours correlating the transactions with publicly accessible data, pursuing trends, hunting for that one giveaway. He unearthed inflated landscaping contracts awarded to a firm helmed by Eleanor's brother-in-law. Outrageous consulting. Fees paid to phantom entities. Then he spotted it. A series of transfers into a private Swiss account, one registered under Eleanor Ainsworth's name. That a jolt of adrenaline surged through him. He had it. The irrefutable evidence. The proof he needed to unmask her corruption. The ledger divulged something more, something far more disturbing. Payments originating from Tranquility Investments funneled into a political action committee known for its support of right-leaning politicians. The sums were significant, enough to sway local elections. Arthur recoiled in his chair, his mind reeling. Eleanor wasn't merely embezzling money. She was using the HOA's funds to purchase political sway. The implications were immense that he needed to proceed carefully. Simply exposing her graft wasn't enough. He had to dismantle her whole system, root out the decay infecting Tranquility Falls. He closed the ledger, inhaling deeply. The battle was far from won. In truth, it had just begun. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful, verdant streets of Tranquility Falls. The name now reeked of irony. There was nothing tranquil about this place. That IT was a battleground, and he was the reluctant combatant. He couldn't wage this war alone. That he required allies, people he could confide in. Sarah, the forensic accountant who had helped him unearth the primary traces of fraud, sprang to mind. That he would need her prowess once more. Legal counsel, too, someone well-versed in the labyrinthine domain of corporate law and political finance. He retrieved his phone, punching in Sarah's digits. "Sarah," he began, his tone resolute. "I need your aid. This is far deeper than we imagined." As he spoke, a hard resolve settled upon him. He was no longer just fighting for his property rights. He was fighting for the very essence of Tranquility Falls. He was fighting for justice. He was fighting for the right of ordinary individuals to live untouched by the heavy hand of unchecked power. And he wouldn't yield, regardless of the cost. The revelation. The last digital lock clicked open. Code poured across Arthur's screen, coalescing into a single, damning phrase. Beneficial owner. Penhaligon Trust. He froze, the words burning into his retinas. Penhaligon Trust. His grandfather's legacy supposedly dissolved years ago to a trust that impossibly controlled. Tranquility Investments, a jolt, less fear than stark disbelief, surged through him. Tranquility Investments, the entity holding Tranquility Glens hostage with crushing mortgages. The entity Eleanor Ainsworth was systematically draining. The entity he now helmed. He recoiled from the desk, the leather protesting beneath him. The monitor cast a ghostly pallor on his face, highlighting the incredulity etched there. This had to be wrong, a phantom in the machine. Another calculated deception by Eleanor. He initiated the decryption sequence anew, his fingers fumbling over the keys. The same irrefutable declaration. Penhaligon Trust, beneficial owner. Arthur Penhaligon. He lurched to the window, craving air, perspective. Before him sprawled the manicured perfection of Tranquility Glens, blissfully unaware of the turmoil churning within his study. Each manicured lawn, each precisely trimmed hedge, represented a debt, a burden shouldered because of him. The irony stung. He, who cherished privacy above all, who sought solace in anonymity, was now inextricably bound to the monster he was fighting. His grandfather, an astute, if quirky, entrepreneur, had always preached about lasting impact. Arthur had written it off as outdated sentiment, a relic of a bygone age, and he'd never grasped the allure of empire, of wielding influence. That he'd actively shunned it, preferring quiet contemplation to the cacophony of commerce. Now, his ancestor had bequeathed him just that, thrusting him into a conflict he never sought. That he recalled the labyrinthine legal documents he'd uncovered, the deceptive structures Eleanor had erected to conceal her perfidy. All this time, he'd been laser-focused on exposing her, proving her misdeeds. He'd been on the defensive, reacting to her every play. Now, the board was upturned. He wasn't a mere pawn. He was the linchpin that a wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm him. The ramifications were monumental. The fight wasn't simply about stopping excessive fees. That IT wasn't merely about unmasking Eleanor's malfeasance. That IT was about safeguarding his inheritance. The notion repulsed him. He had no desire to be a landlord, a financier, a silent puppeteer controlling the lives of his neighbors. He simply yearned for peace. But could he simply walk away? Could he ignore the injustice he'd unearthed, knowing he possessed the power to right it? The faces of his neighbors flickered in his mind. Mrs. Henderson, struggling to stay afloat. Tom and Lisa, sacrificing everything for their children's well-being. They were being ruthlessly exploited by Eleanor's avarice. And he, Arthur Penhaligon, held the key to their freedom. That he squeezed his eyes shut, willing the chaotic fragments to coalesce into a coherent whole. He needed a blueprint, a strategy. He couldn't simply crash the next HOA meeting and proclaim, "Surprise, I own a mortgage company." The resulting pandemonium would be disastrous. Eleanor would likely abscond with what remained, leaving Tranquility Glens a wasteland. He needed to be calculated, methodical, that he needed to wield this newfound power responsibly. Ethically, he had to devise a way to dismantle Eleanor's edifice without destroying the community in the process. His eyes snapped open, a spark of steel glinting within their depths. That he might not have asked for this burden, but it was as now he would not permit Eleanor Ainsworth to prevail. He would not stand idly by while she plundered his neighbors, destroying the very fabric of his community. He returned to his desk, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. He needed a full understanding of the scope of his dominion. He needed to dissect the loan agreements, the investment portfolios, the intricate web of Tranquility Investments. He needed to uncover a means of leveraging his ownership to expose Eleanor's crimes and safeguard the community. Hours dissolved into a blur of intense research. That he discovered clauses in the mortgage documentation that empowered Tranquility Investments to intervene in cases of fiscal mismanagement. He identified vulnerabilities in Eleanor's network of shell companies that could be exploited. He unearthed evidence of her attempts to manipulate property assessments, enriching herself at the expense of homeowners. The more he uncovered, the more his anger transformed into a frigid, focused resolve. That he was no longer just battling for abstract justice. He was fighting to protect his own unexpected legacy. He would employ his grandfather's creation to demolish Eleanor's scheme, brick by excruciating brick. Dawn broke, painting the horizon with streaks of rose and gold. Arthur leaned back, drained yet strangely energized. He had a plan forming that it was bold, precarious, and potentially cataclysmic. But it represented the sole path to ensuring that Eleanor Ainsworth answered for her transgressions, and that Tranquility Glens remained a sanctuary, not a corporate playground. That he would initiate a special session of the Tranquility Investments Board. He would demand a thorough accounting of the company's books. He would present Eleanor's embezzlement to the authorities. And then he would restore Tranquility Glens to its inhabitants. He would renegotiate the mortgages, reduce the interest rates, and guarantee that the community was governed by its own members, not by a crooked HOA president pulling the strings from the shadows. That he reached for his phone, his thumb poised over the dial button. The moment of truth had arrived. The time to reclaim Tranquility Glens was now. That he punched in the number, his voice firm as he spoke into the receiver. Arthur Penhaligon here. I'm calling to convene an urgent board meeting for Tranquility Investments. There are discrepancies that warrant immediate attention. The Gambit. The Penhaligon Trust papers lay strewn across Arthur's dining table. The afternoon sun, a harsh spotlight on the dense legalese. The previous day's revelations sat heavy, a knot of disbelief tempered by a burgeoning determination. He, Arthur Penhaligon, the unlikely heir, held the reins, the unseen power over the very entity crushing Tranquility Glens. He pushed away from the table. The chair's screech against the floorboards cutting through the silence, and went to the window, below. Mrs. Henderson tended her roses with quiet dedication. Each precise clip a miniature sacrifice to beauty. It was that unwavering commitment to simple pleasures that Eleanor and her cohorts threatened to extinguish. He had to intervene, but with prudence. This was no schoolyard scuffle. It was a strategic duel against a pitiless adversary. That he needed an opening, a calculated risk to gain leverage. That he began to pace, the rug absorbing the nervous energy radiating from him. The toll gates, they were the blatant emblem of Eleanor's dominion, a constant sting of her greed. More importantly, they were also the most vulnerable point. Arthur halted, a plan coalescing in his mind. Charging into an HOA meeting waving ownership papers was futile. Eleanor would drown him in legal quicksand, deploy delaying tactics, and launch character assassinations. He required a shield, someone to act as his agent, someone reliable and utterly discreet. His thoughts drifted to David Harding, a former colleague from his software days. David was a master negotiator, a man who could dissect a contract with surgical precision and remain unflappable under fire. Crucially, David was in his debt. Years ago, Arthur's endorsement had salvaged David's career after a mispromotion. Arthur grabbed his phone and dialed. The line buzzed, and then David's familiar voice crackled through. Arthur, well, this is a surprise. Haven't heard from you in years. Enjoying the retired life? David, it's complicated. I need a favor. Discretion is paramount, and it's rather pressing. Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. It concerns a business matter where I require a proxy, someone to represent my interests in a delicate negotiation. Silence hung for a moment. A proxy? Delicate negotiation? What are you mixed up in, Arthur? Arthur inhaled deeply. Full disclosure was premature. Let's just say a small community is being exploited, and I'm positioned to help, but I need boots on the ground, someone with your particular skill set. David's tone softened. You know I'm a sucker for an underdog story. Arthur, elaborate. No names, no specifics, just paint the broad strokes. Arthur sketched the situation, carefully omitting any mention of Tranquility Glens or the HOA. That he spoke of an investment property saddled with exorbitant fees and a predatory management firm. He emphasized the need for a skilled negotiator to champion the owner's interests and demand fairer terms. David listened intently, punctuating with sharp, insightful questions. Finally, he said, Okay, Arthur, I'm intrigued. Sounds like something I could really sink my teeth into. But let's be clear, I value Complete probity and backroom deals. No hidden agendas. We understand each other. Absolutely, David. Transparency is key. That I simply need someone to safeguard my interests and ensure equitable treatment for the residents. Fine. Send me the relevant materials, contracts, financial records, everything you've got. I'll review it and let you know if I'm comfortable proceeding. Relief washed over Arthur. He had his champion. Now came the laborious part, preparing the legal groundwork and drafting David's instructions. He spent the remainder of the evening immersed in the Penhaligon trust documents, underscoring key clauses and composing a detailed briefing for David. He included copies of the HOA statutes, the mortgage agreement between Tranquility Investments and the homeowners, and a thorough analysis of Eleanor's financial maneuvers, the evidence he'd painstakingly compiled. That he meticulously structured the instructions, placing particular emphasis on the toll gates. That David's primary directive was to demand their immediate dismantling, pointing to the excessive fees and the lack of transparency surrounding their implementation. He empowered David to leverage Tranquility Investments' position as mortgage holder to threaten foreclosure if the HOA refused to capitulate. It was a risky move. Eleanor would undoubtedly strike back, but Arthur had anticipated this. That he had devised a contingency, a sequence of countermeasures designed to expose her corruption and undermine her authority. He put the finishing touches on the documents. Arthur felt a resurgence of purpose, and no longer was he merely a recluse hidden behind overgrown shrubbery. He was a force to be reckoned with, an advocate for his community. The next morning, Arthur rendezvoused with David at a quiet cafe a few towns away, deliberately choosing a location distant from Tranquility Glens to avert unwanted scrutiny. He passed David a thick manila envelope containing all the crucial documents. "David, I appreciate you doing this. That I know I'm asking a lot." David accepted the envelope, his gaze searching Arthur's features. "You're different. Arthur, there's a spark in you I haven't seen in years. Whatever this is, it clearly means something to you." Arthur managed a wan smile. It's about justice, about standing up for those who can't fend for themselves." "Then let's get started," David replied, his voice resolute. "I'll go through this tonight and give you my initial assessment tomorrow. But be warned, Arthur, this could get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" Arthur nodded, his jaw firm. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes." As David departed the cafe, Arthur watched him go, a mix of hope and apprehension churning within him. He had set the gears in motion. The opening move had been made. Now, all he could do was wait and see if his carefully constructed strategy would succeed in dethroning Eleanor's reign of terror and restoring tranquility to Tranquility Glens. He knew that Eleanor's reaction would be furious, and the consequences potentially dire. But for the first time in years, Arthur felt a sense of agency, a conviction that he could actually make a difference. The battle for Tranquility Glens was underway, and Arthur Penhaligon was ready to play his hand. Mortgage demand. A young man, overdressed in a city suit that screamed wrong address in Tranquility Glens, approached the HOA office. Eleanor Ainsworth, enthroned behind a desk vast enough to host a small dinner party, watched him with thinly veiled distaste and a spark of curiosity. Beside her, Bart Higgins, the HOA secretary, worried his tie into a near knot. "Yes," Eleanor clipped, her tone sharp enough to etch glass. The courier offered a sealed envelope, the weighty parchment hinting at momentous news. "For Eleanor Ainsworth, president of the Tranquility Glens Homeowners Association. Your signature, please." Eleanor signed with a flourish, her gaze fixed on the courier. A curt nod was his only acknowledgement before he melted back into the manicured landscape. "Wonder what that's about," Bart piped, his voice a nervous tremor. Eleanor ripped the envelope open with practiced efficiency, but a single, pristine sheet of paper revealed the Harding and Stern, attorneys at law letterhead. The message was stark, a financial guillotine. Tranquility Investments, LLC, the holder of the mortgage on the Tranquility Glens Community Center and surrounding common areas, hereby demands immediate remittance of the full outstanding principal, totaling $1,784,322.57. Within 30 days, failure to comply will initiate foreclosure proceedings. Color drained from Eleanor's face as she scanned the missive again, hoping the words would magically reconfigure into something less catastrophic. This can't be true, she gasped, thrusting the paper toward Bart. Bart's eyes bulged as he absorbed the text. Immediate payment? But we're current. There's no justification for this. He adjusted his spectacles, a gesture of rising panic. Tranquility Investments? I thought they were unshakable. They are unshakable, Eleanor retorted, reclaiming her composure with effort. This is a mistake, some sort of legal maneuver. She snatched back the letter, her mind churning. This wasn't just a monetary inconvenience. It was a dagger pointed at her reign. The community center was her power base, ground zero for meticulously staged displays of influence. What do we do? Bart's voice quivered. We fight it naturally, Eleanor declared, her voice laced with steel. We'll hire counsel. Harding and Stern, indeed. We'll see how formidable they truly are. Her fist slammed onto the desktop, the sound reverberating in the cramped office. Call an emergency board session. Now. The board meeting devolved into a maelstrom of accusations and frayed nerves, pushing Bart Higgins precariously close to the fainting point. This is outrageous, bellowed Harold Jenkins, the perpetually bronzed landscaping czar. Who's behind this? Why would Tranquility Investments do this so suddenly? Perhaps a payment was overlooked? Ventured Susan Miller, the timid treasurer, her voice a faint whisper amidst the uproar. Eleanor shot her a glacial glare. We are current on all obligations, Susan. This is a blatant power grab, pure and simple. She paused for effect. Someone intends to seize control of Tranquility Glens, weaponizing the mortgage to achieve it. But who? Harold pressed. Who would benefit? Eleanor harbored suspicions, but kept them veiled for now. She required more evidence, irrefutable proof. That's what we must uncover. In the meantime, we explore our avenues. Can we secure alternative funding? Bart, in his role as ever-diligent secretary, had already initiated inquiries. I've contacted several banks and credit unions, he reported, his voice still tinged with anxiety. But they all seem reticent. The sum is considerable, and, well, the timing is curious. Curious? Eleanor echoed, dripping sarcasm. It's a naked attempt to financially cripple us. They're citing recent market turbulence, Bart continued, oblivious, and some concerns regarding the HOA's fiscal standing. Eleanor's eyes narrowed to slits. Someone had successfully poisoned the well. She suspected Arthur, but how? He was a recluse, an insignificant figure. What sway could he possibly wield? As the board members squabbled, Eleanor attempted to project an aura of serenity, but inwardly she raged. This was about authority, dominion, her painstakingly crafted dynasty. And an unseen hand was attempting to dismantle it piece by piece. The ensuing days became a feverish quest for salvation. Fueled by a volatile mix of anger and desperation, Eleanor tirelessly pursued a solution. She contacted every bank, every investor, every back-alley financier she knew, but each path dead-ended at the same polite, unwavering refusal. Banks cited unforeseen circumstances and adverse market pressures. Investors claimed to be fully committed and unable to absorb further risk. Eleanor grasped the chilling truth. She was being systematically stonewalled. Someone was orchestrating this, and doing a damn fine job. Meanwhile, in the quietude of his home office, Arthur observed the unfolding drama with a somber satisfaction. David Harding, acting on his instructions, had meticulously sealed off every potential escape route for Eleanor and the HOA. That he'd made discreet calls, applied subtle pressure, and reminded key players of their long-standing ties to Tranquility Investments and the dire consequences of defiance. Arthur knew it was ruthless, but he considered it justified. Eleanor had spent too long exploiting the community for her own gain. Now, she would reap what she had sown. Back at the HOA office, Eleanor's options had dwindled to near nothing. The 30-day deadline loomed like a thundercloud over Tranquility Glen's. She summoned Bart, her face now a roadmap of worry lines. "Bart," she began, her voice uncharacteristically muted. "We need to consider other possibilities." Bart looked at her, his eyes wide with dread. "What do you mean?" Eleanor hesitated. It galled her to concede defeat, but the crisis was acute. "We may have to negotiate with Tranquility Investments." Bart's eyes widened further. "Negotiate? But what leverage do we possess?" "I don't know," Eleanor confessed, her voice barely audible. "But we must find something. Otherwise, we stand to lose everything." She gazed out the window, her focus on the impeccably maintained lawns and homes of Tranquility Glen's. It was all dissolving, her reign disintegrating before her eyes, and a cold certainty settled within her. Arthur Penhaligon was the puppet master behind it all. The unassuming neighbor, the harmless eccentric she dismissed, had somehow become her nemesis, the architect of her downfall. The realization was a bitter draught to swallow. The offer. The air in the Tranquility Glen's community center felt leaden, oppressive. The wheezing air conditioner offered scant relief against the August furnace radiating from Eleanor Ainsworth. She sat, a rigid figurehead at the table's helm, her grip on the polished surface a testament to barely contained fury. Beside her, Bart Higgins squirmed, his tie a disheveled mess, a film of sweat glistening on his brow. Across from them, Clara Meadowbrook observed Eleanor with careful trepidation. The emergency board meeting had been convened with startling urgency, barely a day after the foreclosure notice landed like a bomb on Eleanor's desk. The subject at hand was starkly, brutally simple. Tranquility Investments terms, the manila envelope sat between them, practically humming with unspoken threats. Inside lay the proposition, delivered by a lawyer with a face carved from stone. Dahid retreated swiftly, leaving the HOA board to grapple with its implications. "This is beyond the pale," Eleanor finally bit out, her voice a razor's edge. She punctuated the air with a sharp jab at the document. "Utterly unacceptable." Bart coughed nervously. "Well, Mrs. Ainsworth, it is a rather magnanimous offer, in certain respects, forgiving the entire debt. That's considerable." Eleanor's icy glare instantly choked off his words. "Magnanimous? They're attempting to strong-arm us. Bartholomew, can't you see the manipulation? They're exploiting our predicament." Clara leaned forward, her tone even, resolute. "Eleanor, let's face reality. Our situation is precarious that we can't deny it. And this offer, as Bartholomew rightly pointed out, possesses merit. We're talking about salvaging the community center, averting financial disaster. What precise element do you find so objectionable?" Eleanor snorted. "Objectionable? I object to coercion. I object to some anonymous entity dictating the governance of our community. They intend to dismantle the toll gates. Clara, those gates are paramount to preserving our property values, to deterring undesirable influences." She emphasized the last word with a look that lingered pointedly on Clara. "Undesirable influences?" Clara arched a brow. "Are you referring to delivery personnel and home healthcare providers now forced to pay for access? Or the families barely scraping by who must now factor in toll expenses? The gates have generated persistent complaints, Eleanor. This could prove beneficial. And they wish to restructure the HOA." Eleanor pressed on, her voice laced with contempt. "What does that even signify? Transforming Tranquility Glen's into a free-for-all, granting every Tom, Dick, and Harry a voice in our affairs. We have regulations for a purpose, Clara. Safeguards. Regulations that you enact unilaterally, Eleanor," Clara retorted, her voice gaining volume. "Regulations that favor you and your inner circle, while burdening the majority." Bart shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on some unseen point, tugging at his strangled tie. His complexion florid, he yearned to interject, to diffuse the mounting tension, but fear of Eleanor's retribution paralyzed him. "This boils down to power, doesn't it, Eleanor?" Clara pressed, relentlessly. "You're unwilling to relinquish control, unwilling to share authority. even if it leads to the HOA's ruin. Eleanor's face was a study in suppressed rage. This has nothing to do with power. It's about protecting our community from outside meddling, about upholding the standards we've painstakingly established. Standards? Clara laughed, a short, mirthless sound. What standards? The standard of levying exorbitant fines for trivial offenses. The standard of dismissing valid grievances while prioritizing your pet projects. The standard of silencing dissent. Silence descended, broken only by the feeble hum of the overburdened air conditioner. Bart swallowed hard, his eyes ping-ponging between the two women that he knew. With a sickening certainty that Clara spoke truth, he had witnessed the favoritism, the blatant disregard for protocol. When it suited Eleanor's purposes, he had even been complicit, forced to approve dubious invoices, to overlook transgressions by Eleanor's allies. But he lacked the courage to object. He always had. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice a silken threat. Are you aligning yourself with them? Clara, are you betraying our community? Clara met her gaze without flinching. I'm aligning myself with what is just, Eleanor. And what is just is accepting this proposition that it's the sole path to saving Tranquility Glens. Never, Eleanor spat. I will never submit to extortion, that I will combat this, that I will unearth the resources, that we will not be cowed by some faceless corporation. How, Eleanor? Clara questioned, her voice tinged with pity. How will you conjure such a sum? We've already emptied the reserves. Are you contemplating another special assessment? Because I assure you, the residents will erupt. Eleanor dismissed her. She rose abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This session is adjourned. That I require time for reflection, for planning, that I refuse to be railroaded into a choice that could jeopardize Tranquility Glen's very existence. She stalked out, leaving Clara and Bart to stare after her. Bart sank into his chair, defeated. Well, Clara said, sighing heavily. That unfolded precisely as anticipated. Bart looked up, a mixture of dread and exasperation etched on his face. What'll we do, Clara? She's set on destroying us all. We're going to resist, Bart, Clara declared, her voice steeling. We're going to demonstrate to Eleanor Ainsworth that her reign as autocrat is over. But how? Bart stammered. She wields all the authority. She dictates everything. Not any longer, Bart, Clara said, a flicker of a smile gracing her lips. I suspect the dynamics have shifted, and I believe we possess an unexpected champion. She rose and moved toward the exit, pausing to glance back at Bart. Are you with me, Bart, or will you allow Eleanor to drag you down with her? Bart hesitated, then slowly, tentatively nodded. I'm with you, Clara. As Clara departed the community center, a surge of resolve coursed through her. The time for action had arrived. The fight for Tranquility Glen's future had begun. She retrieved her phone, scrolling until she located the desired contact. Arthur Penhaligon. She pressed the call button. Foreclosure. The morning air, sharp with pine and the bitterness of simmering discontent, heralded the arrival of the Notice Point 2 officers, faces like granite, affixed the garish orange paper to the community center doors. Notice of foreclosure screamed from the page, followed by a labyrinth of legal prose designed to obfuscate. The brutal truth, however, was unmistakable. Tranquility Investments was demanding its due. Almost immediately, a knot of residents materialized. Murmurs gave way to appalled gasps, then to cries of indignation. Summoned by a neighbor's urgent call, Eleanor Ainsworth swept in like a dethroned queen. Her immaculately styled hair seemed to bristle with outrage as she shouldered her way to the front, her expensive handbag a weapon against the encroaching reality. What is the meaning of this outrage? She demanded, her voice a taut wire. The younger of the officers, barely old enough to shave, mumbled, Just posting the notice, ma'am. Contact the court for details. He thrust a card into her hand and, with his partner, retreated swiftly. Eleanor shredded the card, her features twisted in barely leashed fury. Unacceptable, she roared, pivoting to face her neighbors. This is an overt attempt to dismantle everything we've built. Someone is determined to destroy our community. Clara Meadowbrook stepped forward, her face a study in resolve mingled with trepidation. Eleanor, this could be a moment of reckoning. Perhaps we should consider the settlement. Prolonging this fight could drain us dry. Eleanor swung around, her eyes flashing like flint. Bankruptcy? Utter nonsense. We possess ample resources. We will contest this with every means at our disposal. This is a mere hiccup, a pathetic gesture by. Her words faltered, her gaze sweeping the crowd as if searching for an enemy combatant. One name remained unspoken, a specter that haunted her thoughts. Arthur Penhaligon. That afternoon, the local news descended, lenses capturing the smoldering tensions within Tranquility Glens. Esmeralda Vargas, a whirlwind of crimson lipstick and tireless energy from the Mill Creek Gazette, navigated the burgeoning chaos with practiced ease. She sensed a story here, a far richer narrative than a mere squabble among homeowners. She began with the residents, her microphone an extension of her unwavering attention, listening to their fears and grievances. Many were paralyzed by uncertainty, torn between community allegiance and the stark terror of losing their homes. "We're at a loss," confessed a tearful Mrs. Henderson, clutching her small dog for comfort. "We placed our trust in Eleanor. We believed she was acting in our best interests." Esmeralda then approached Eleanor, who stood like a sovereign on the community center steps, encircled by a cadre of devoted followers. Eleanor delivered a carefully rehearsed statement, decrying the foreclosure as a hostile act by unseen adversaries bent on destabilizing the community. She extolled Tranquility Glen's resilience, its unwavering commitment to property values, and her own steadfast dedication to its residents. Esmeralda pressed her for specifics. "Ms. Ainsworth, can you identify the individuals or entities responsible for this foreclosure? Do you have any specific suspicions?" Eleanor hesitated, a hairline crack appearing in her polished veneer. "We are exploring all avenues," she said evasively. "We will not be cowed by these tactics. Is it true that the HOA is significantly in debt?" Esmeralda persisted, sidestepping Eleanor's carefully crafted response. "Are the residents fully informed about the community's financial burdens?" Eleanor's spine stiffened. "Those are matters of confidentiality," she retorted, "and I will not discuss them with you." She dismissed Esmeralda with a curt turn, signaling the end of the interview to her entourage. Undeterred, Esmeralda sought out Clara Meadowbrook. Though clearly on edge, Clara agreed to speak, insisting her remarks be attributed to a concerned resident. She carefully laid out the terms of the proposed settlement, stressing its potential for a fairer outcome for everyone involved. "Don't you believe the residents deserve transparency regarding Tranquility Investments?" Esmeralda probed, her gaze unwavering. "Don't they deserve to know who truly holds the reins of their destiny?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting toward the community center. I can't elaborate further," she stammered. "I've already revealed too much." Esmeralda watched her retreat, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Clara was holding back. There was a larger, more complex narrative waiting to be unearthed, and Esmeralda Vargas intended to expose it. That evening, after submitting her initial report to the Gazette, Esmeralda sat amidst the chaos of her desk, a landscape of scattered documents and drained coffee mugs. She accessed the online records for Tranquility Investments, tracing its convoluted ownership through a thicket of shell companies and offshore accounts. The deeper she delved, the more labyrinthine the structure became. Someone was working hard to conceal something. She printed a roster of names linked to the various entities, a collection of lawyers, accountants, and faceless corporate officers. One name, nestled deep within the layers of documentation, snagged her attention. Penhaligon. Esmeralda frowned. Penhaligon? Where had she encountered that name before? She scanned her notes from the day, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. Then recognition dawned. The solitary figure residing in the neglected property bordering Tranquility Glens. Arthur Penhaligon. Could it be plausible? Could this unassuming, reticent man be connected to the foreclosure? It seemed far-fetched, yet a gut feeling told her otherwise. Esmeralda trusted her instincts, and those instincts were screaming that Arthur Penhaligon held the key to unlocking Tranquility Glen's secrets. She leaned back, a slow smile curving her lips. This was no longer a mere HOA dispute. It was a story about concealed influence, corporate avarice, and a quiet man who might just hold all the cards. Esmeralda reached for her phone, already dialing. Time to pay Mr. Penhaligon a call. The leak. The envelope, a bland manila rectangle devoid of a return address, thudded onto Esmeralda Vargas' desk amidst the usual detritus of the Mill Creek Gazette, press kits, and half-baked story ideas. She nearly dismissed it, but the Tranquility Glen's postmark caught her eye. Inside, a USB drive and a stark typed note. For Esmeralda Vargas, it declared, "The truth about Tranquility Glen's, handle with care." Her heart thumped a little faster. Weeks she'd spent chasing whispers, hitting brick walls, and encountering the kind of official inertia that suggested a well-funded cover-up. This felt different, like a potential breakthrough. Back at her workstation, she hesitated before plugging in the drive. Cybersecurity was a legitimate worry, particularly with potentially volatile data, but her journalistic instincts, sharpened over years of hard work, screamed that the risk was justified. The drive unlocked a treasure trove, meticulously kept ledgers, HOA meeting summaries, interwoven emails, even digital copies of cash checks. It was a plunge into the core of the Tranquility Glen's Homeowners Association. And as Esmeralda navigated the files, a disquieting narrative materialized. Eleanor Ainsworth, the proclaimed champion of Tranquility Glen's, appeared not only to be hindering the foreclosure, but reaping personal gain. The data revealed a pattern. Dubious expenditures, lucrative contracts awarded to companies tied to her family, and a flagrant disregard for the community's fiscal health. A wave of fury washed over Esmeralda. She'd witnessed corruption before, but the sheer gall of Ainsworth's machinations, the way she'd betrayed her neighbors, was enraging. This wasn't mere incompetence. It was outright embezzlement. She dedicated the remainder of the day to verifying the material, cross-referencing documents against public records, and contacting sources to corroborate details. The deeper she probed, the more damning the evidence became. As dusk settled, Esmeralda crafted her article, carefully piecing together the facts and presenting the evidence with clarity. She recognized the potential of this story to expose the entire foreclosure fiasco, and she was determined to get it right. Meanwhile, miles away in a dimly lit sanctuary, Arthur Penhaligon watched the Mill Creek Gazette's website auto-refresh on his screen that he sipped lukewarm tea, the bitter tang of familiar solace delivering. The information anonymously had been a calculated risk, but he couldn't expose himself directly. Not yet. Not before he was fully prepared to unveil his involvement. Weeks he'd invested, compiling the evidence, sifting through the digital records of Tranquility Investments, the business he unwittingly controlled. Initially, he'd been oblivious to Eleanor Ainsworth's machinations, too immersed in his own esoteric interests to pay attention to the minutiae of HOA squabbles. Discovering the truth, however, demanded action that he recalled his initial meeting with John Davies. "I need to get some information to a reporter," Arthur had said, his voice hushed, "but I need to remain anonymous completely." John, a young attorney with ambitions, had been drawn in. He'd monitored the Tranquility Glen situation, the foreclosure notices, the rising tensions. He grasped the potential of this case to elevate his firm's profile. "We can certainly explore mechanisms for maintaining your anonymity," John had responded, adjusting his tie. "We can employ a confidential intermediary, establish a blind trust, or even use a burner phone. The trick is to erect sufficient barriers to safeguard your identity." Arthur listened intently, posing probing questions regarding the legal implications of each strategy. Despite not being a lawyer, he possessed sharp analytical skills, capable of quickly understanding complex concepts. He'd picked John because the younger man exhibited a genuine interest in the finer points. Now, as he reread Esmeralda's article, Arthur felt a pang of satisfaction. The truth had surfaced, exposed for all to see. The headline dominated the screen: Tranquility Glens, HOA president accused of mismanagement, self-dealing. The story detailed Ainsworth's alleged misuse of funds, the rigged contracts, the dubious expenses that IT quoted extensively from the documents Arthur had supplied, crafting a devastating portrayal of a woman who had betrayed her community's trust. The online comment section was already erupting. Some residents expressed disbelief and shock, while others thundered with indignation that a handful, staunch Ainsworth loyalists, fervently defended her, dismissing the article as fake news and a smear. Campaign. Eleanor Ainsworth, for her part, was pacing her tastefully appointed living room, clutching a glass of amber liquid. The piece was a disaster, a complete and unmitigated calamity. Her phone had been ringing incessantly since it was published. Board members, community leaders, even her own kin were demanding explanations. She slammed the tumbler onto the mahogany table, the impact making her flinch. How could this have transpired? Who had leaked the information? She had been so cautious, so meticulous, in covering her tracks. Her gaze fell upon the framed portrait of her deceased husband, a severe man in military dress. He had consistently cautioned her about the risks of avarice, the importance of honor. She had disregarded his wisdom, seduced by the lure of influence and affluence. Now, it seemed, she was about to face the music. Back at the Gazette, Esmeralda felt a potent mix of exhilaration and trepidation. She knew that publishing the article was merely the opening act. The repercussions would be substantial, and she steeled herself for the inevitable storm. Her phone buzzed that IT was her editor. "Esmeralda, stellar work on the Ainsworth expose," he said, his tone brimming with enthusiasm. "The phones haven't stopped ringing that it's all anyone is talking about." "Thanks," she responded, striving for a casual air. "I just hope it has an impact." "It already has," he stated. "The DA's office just announced they're opening a probe that you've nailed them." Esmeralda smiled. This was her vocation, exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable. Yet, she also felt the story wasn't complete. Something lingered, a missing puzzle piece she couldn't quite place. She scrolled back through the files, seeking a connection, a unifying element. Her gaze settled on a name, mentioned only briefly in some of the correspondence: Arthur Penhaligon. The name stirred a faint memory, but she couldn't quite recall it. A quick internet search yielded scant results. A few arcane allusions to a mathematician of the same name. She frowned. Something about Penhaligon felt meaningful. He was a phantom in the machine, a presence lurking in the shadows. She suspected he held the key to unraveling the entire enigma. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. "I need you to dig into something for me," she said to her contact. "A name, Arthur Penhaligon. Get everything you can on him." Arthur, in the meantime, powered down his laptop and approached the window. The lamplight cast elongated, distorted shadows across the manicured lawns of Tranquility Glens. He watched as a police cruiser inched through the neighborhood, its red and blue lights flashing an ominous warning. He knew the stakes were about to rise dramatically. He was no longer a passive observer, a silent onlooker. He had entered the arena, and there was no retreat. The rules had shifted. His battle now extended far. Beyond Eleanor Ainsworth, that he was fighting for the very essence of Tranquility Glens, and he intended to prevail. The resignation. A palpable tension hung in Tranquility Glens Community Hall, a blend of eager expectation and poorly veiled vindictiveness. Every chair was taken, bodies pressed against the walls, a sea of judging gazes fixed on the stage. Under the unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights stood Eleanor Ainsworth, a deposed monarch. The perfect coif had lost its shape. Her designer suit bore the marks of distress, and even expertly applied cosmetics failed to conceal the tremor in her hands. Clara Meadowbrook, seated in the front row, wore a mask of inner turmoil. Once Eleanor's staunchest supporter, the revelations in Esmeralda Vardas's article had chipped away at her unwavering faith. She'd championed Eleanor for so long, trusting implicitly in her leadership and vision for the Glens. But now, doubt coiled within her. Beside her, Bart Higgins shifted uncomfortably, his tie askew. His usually ruddy face drained of color. He avoided eye contact. His gaze skittering around the room, Eleanor's amplified. Throat-clearing cut through the expectant hum. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice shaky at first, then firming. "As you are aware, serious allegations have surfaced concerning the HOA's finances." A beat of silence, then a steely edge entered her tone. "These accusations, fueled by sensationalism and malice, have fostered an atmosphere of distrust. A ripple of unease spread through the room that a cough punctuated the air. Eleanor forged ahead, a potent cocktail of indignation and self-pity lending strength to her voice. "For 15 years, I've poured my life into Tranquility Glens, that I've dedicated myself to making this community a model for the region, that I've worked tirelessly to safeguard property values, enhance our offerings, and guarantee the safety of every resident." She scanned the crowd, seeking a flicker of support, meeting mostly cold, unwavering stares. "However," she continued, bitterness coating her words, "it has become regrettably clear that my continued service as HOA president is now a hindrance, diverting attention from the important work at hand." Another pause, the weight of her words settling over the room. "Therefore, with profound regret, but with the best interests of Tranquility Glens foremost in my mind, I tender my resignation, effective immediately." The hall exploded. Gasps, cheers, and angry outbursts clashed in a chaotic wave. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, a sickening wave washing over her. She'd anticipated this moment. Yet the finality, the public abasement, stung. Bart Higgins, conversely, seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping as if a crushing burden had been lifted. Eleanor raised her hands, attempting to quell the uproar. "I implore you," she called out, her voice fracturing. "Choose your next leaders carefully. Choose those who will uphold the standards of excellence I have strived for. Choose those who will protect the values of our community." She fixed the crowd with a resentful glare. "And remember," she whispered, the words barely audible, "you will miss me." She turned and strode off stage, her head held high in defiance, though her gait betrayed her vulnerability. Clara watched her retreat, a complicated mix of sympathy and relief swirling within her. Eleanor's departure was necessary, she knew, yet a sense of loss lingered. The meeting dissolved into a flurry of procedural motions and impassioned arguments. Nominations were put forward, speeches delivered, and finally, after what felt like an age, the votes were tallied. A jubilant roar erupted as the results were announced. A new HOA board, composed of vocal critics of Eleanor's regime, promising transparency and community engagement, had been elected. Harold Jenkins, a retired accountant, the new president, bounded onto the stage, his face radiant. "Friends," he announced, his voice brimming with sincere enthusiasm, "this is a new dawn for Tranquility Glens. We are dedicated to rebuilding trust, fostering collaboration, and ensuring every resident has a voice in shaping our community's future." He outlined the board's initial priorities: a comprehensive audit of the HOA's accounts, a review of existing contracts, and the repeal of several contentious policies, chief among them the reviled guest parking fees. But the loudest applause thundered when he declared their first official act: the dismantling of the toll gates. The following morning broke crisp and cleared. A small throng gathered at the entrance to Tranquility Glens, armed with cameras and folding chairs. Arthur Penhaligon lingered. Near the back, shrouded in the shadows of the oak trees lining the avenue, he watched as a crew, contracted by the new HOA board, began to disassemble the toll gates. Metal shrieked and groaned as the workers unbolted the barriers, severing the chains that had symbolized the HOA's iron grip. The pungent scent of welding fumes mingled with the celebratory cries of the onlookers. A wave of cheers washed over the crowd as the final gate clattered to the ground. Hugs were exchanged, high fives given, and spontaneous dancing broke out in the street. Car horns blared in joyous unison. Clara Meadowbrook stood close to the front, observing the scene with conflicting emotions churning within her. She experienced a sense of liberation, of finally escaping the oppressive atmosphere that had choked Tranquility Glens for too long. Yet, a pang of sadness, A recognition that the community she'd known was irretrievably lost tugged at her heart. Beside her, Bart Higgins was practically bouncing with elation. "Can you believe it, Clara?" he exclaimed, his voice infused with childlike glee. "They're really gone. No more toll gates, no more bleeding us dry." He clapped his hands, his eyes sparkling with delight, as the sun ascended in the sky. The last vestiges of the toll gates were loaded onto a flatbed and hauled away. The entrance to Tranquility Glens stood open, welcoming and unencumbered. Arthur Penhaligon watched the truck disappear down the road, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. He might have won this skirmish, but he understood the battle was far from over. Esmeralda Vargas persisted in her investigation, relentlessly pursuing answers, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was closing in on the truth. His pocket vibrated. An unfamiliar number. He paused, then answered. "Penhaligon," he stated, his voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Penhaligon," a sharp, feminine voice responded. "This is Special Agent Davies with the District Attorney's Office. I need to arrange a meeting with you at your earliest opportunity." Peace restored. The raw shriek of metal against concrete tore Arthur from his reverie. Peeking through the drapes, a shard of sunrise painted his faded Persian rug gold. Outside, the first toll booth was succumbing to the dismantler's torched work crew, contracted by the freshly elected HOA. Grappled with the stubborn structure, each cut spitting incandescent sparks, he felt a curious blend, elation laced with an unsettling hollowness. The ordeal was, if not entirely finished, at least entering a new phase. Eleanor was out of the picture. The gates were falling, and Tranquility Glens might yet become a genuine neighborhood, instead of a gilded cage defined by usurious fees and nitpicking rules. Dropping the curtain, Esmeralda Vargas's dogged expression flickered in his thoughts. IT wasn't truly over. She was still probing, chasing the tangled threads connecting him to Tranquility Investments. In a word yet from Special Agent Davies. But he knew that inevitable conversation hung like a sword of Damocles, threatening his fragile serenity. Still, he allowed himself a sliver of satisfaction. He'd acted according to his conscience. He'd faced down a tyrant and emerged victorious. Later, a terse pronouncement graced the new HOA website. Scanning it on his antiquated laptop, Arthur felt a twitch of amusement. Tranquility Investments, the entity holding the community's mortgage, had, in a spirit of goodwill and neighborly support, relinquished the outstanding debt. The announcement lauded the new board's dedication to financial openness and prudent management. Arthur Penhaligon received no mention. The quiet, withdrawn man who'd quietly orchestrated the entire coup erased from the narrative. He shut the laptop, his own reflection staring back. A man past his prime, with receding hair, eternally disheveled attire, and eyes that belied a sharp intellect. He was no champion he hadn't aspired to be. He was simply a man who cherished his privacy, his tranquility, and his sense of right and wrong. The following morning witnessed an unassuming ceremony at the Glens Community Center. Martha Peterson, the retired schoolteacher now presiding over the HOA, addressed a small crowd of residents, her voice wavering with emotion as she declared the official debt cancellation. She spoke of fresh starts, communal unity, and a rosier future for Tranquility Glens. Arthur viewed the video later. Uploaded to the HOA page, he remained unseen, an anonymous benefactor cloaked in digital shadows, precisely as he preferred. Recognition wasn't his aim, only resolution. Days drifted into weeks, and something akin to normality seeped back into Tranquility Glens. Architectural uniformity, however, proved less resilient. Vividly hued doors replaced Eleanor's monotonous browns and grays that once banned bird feeders now swayed from branches. Emboldened by newfound liberties, residents began to express themselves, their personalities blossoming like hardy perennials after a harsh winter. Even from the seclusion of his property, Arthur noted the shift. He observed neighbors conversing in their yards, children at play in the streets, and an overarching sense of lightness that had long been banished. He even ventured out one sun-drenched afternoon, drawn to the nascent community garden. Gardening had always been a passion, stifled by the HOA's tyrannical constraints. Now, he observed rows of vegetables and flowers, lovingly cultivated by residents working in concert. He lingered at the periphery, observing them, a subtle smile gracing his lips. Beautiful, isn't it? He turned to find Martha Peterson beside him, her genial face etched with smile lines. He hadn't spoken with her directly since the tumultuous town hall. "It is," he concurred, his voice raspy from disuse. "It's all thanks to you, you know," she said quietly, her gaze locking with his. "Everyone realizes it, even if they don't know you." He shifted awkwardly. "I simply wanted to be of assistance." "You surpassed mere assistance, Mr. Penhaligon," she asserted, her tone resolute. "You restored our community to us." Words failed him, but he merely nodded, his attention reverting to the garden's vibrant tapestry. "We're hosting a community picnic next weekend," Martha continued. "A celebration. We'd be honored by your presence." He hesitated. The prospect of mingling with a crowd sparked his familiar anxiety. Yet he also understood the importance of demonstrating support, of participating in the community he'd been instrumental in saving. "I'll give it consideration," he conceded finally. Martha grinned. "That's all I request." She paused, then added, "And thank you once more for everything." She departed then, rejoining the gardeners, her form silhouetted against the descending sun. Arthur remained rooted to the spot, the aroma of earth and blossoms filling his senses that a warmth suffused him, a sense of connection he hadn't experienced in ages. He did attend the picnic. He arrived late, remained for only an hour, and largely kept to the fringes. But he was there to witness the laughter, the camaraderie, the unadulterated joy illuminating his neighbors' faces. He perceived tranquility. Glenn's, not as a sterile assemblage of cookie-cutter dwellings, but as a vibrant, breathing entity. Strolling back to his home, long shadows stretched across the lawn, cast by the setting sun. He reflected upon the events that had transpired. He'd stumbled into this conflict, nearly by happenstance, and discovered himself fighting for a cause he deeply believed in. He'd leveraged his resources, his acumen, and his accidental sway to effect meaningful change he still harbored mixed feelings about. Possessing tranquility investments that IT felt peculiar, unsettling, to wield such influence, such authority, without ever seeking it. Still, he'd channeled that power for the greater good. He'd forgiven the debt, aided in revitalizing the community, and returned to his quiet existence, content in the knowledge that he'd acted justly. Esmeralda Vargas and Special Agent Davies remained silent. He knew the investigation persisted, his role subject to scrutiny, but he'd reconciled himself to that. Reality he possessed nothing to conceal. He'd acted with integrity, and he stood prepared to face any repercussions. He reached his front stoop, the porch light painting the weathered wood with a welcoming glow. That he unlocked the door, crossed the threshold, and shut it firmly behind him. But he was home. The house was tranquil, imbued with the comforting scent of aged tomes and beeswax. He traversed the living room, past the overflowing shelves and time-worn furnishings, and settled into his beloved armchair. That he selected a book, a compilation of poems by Robert Frost, and commenced reading. The verses washed over him, pacifying his mind, quieting his soul. He read for hours, engrossed in the cadence and the rhyme, until the room succumbed to darkness, illuminated only by the small lamp on his desk. Finally, he closed the book, placed it on the table, and reclined in his chair. He closed his eyes and embraced the silence. That it was a comfortable silence, a serene silence, a silence he had craved. He was solitary, yet not lonely. He was at peace. He had waged a battle, secured a victory, and retreated to his life. He was Arthur Penhaligon, a reclusive man who treasured his privacy, his tranquility, and his sense of equity. And for the moment, at least, he possessed all three.